Hello there. In this video, I'm going to show you how to create some custom in the hoop coasters. Now what we're looking at right here is a basic in the hoop coaster design that I created, and it's available for free on my website. So just check out the link below. It doesn't look like much here, but let's take a look at the file. And although I have all of the functionality of Embrilliance, you can do this just by having Embrilliance Essentials. Okay, so over here, I'm going to expand this little guy right there to see what my design is comprised of. And I've got 4 different colors here. So if we go to the stitch simulator, we can see what the stitch out is going to look like. So let's just play that and play it kind of a little bit faster. So this first stitch line is for my placement stitching. Whoops, pause. Okay, the red is for the placement stitching. This would be stitched out on the hooped dissolving stabilizer. Okay, that just shows you where the coaster is going to go. Now we're getting into the blue. After we have that placement line there, the red, we're going to put down our fabric, our top layer of coaster fabric, and this blue line is going to start stitching, and it's going to stitch, and what that's going to do is it's going to hold it in place. Okay, I have it set up to do I think a double stitch, so it kind of keeps it in place a little bit better. So we were done with the blue. Now we're going to get into the purple. So here we have the purple. But before we get into the purple, let's talk about the blue still. So we have our fabric down. We have it stitched down with the blue stitching. Then we're going to take it off the hoop, and we are going to trim around that excess fabric. Okay, so we have our top layer. All right, now if we were going to make a plain coaster, like no design in there, then we could proceed by taping the back side of our coaster to the back of the stabilizer. Okay, and then we would start the purple stitching. That would hold that piece together. After the purple is done, then we will take the hoop off the machine, trim the back side, and then put it back. And finally, we would stitch this green, which is the final satin stitching. So that's going to hide all the raw edges. The only thing that we would have left outside of the green is just stabilizer that's going to dissolve. And then we have a coaster. Okay, but this coaster is super boring. So how do we do something more custom, and where do we put it within the design? Well, if we have essentials, we can do that. We can merge in some lettering. This is a very simple example. Okay, so let's just do a monogram, and I'm going to use one of my fonts. Let's just do a big J, and I'm going to use, I like the Gloria Font. That's a fun one. Okay, and I'm just going to scale it up. Whoops, not rotate it, scale it up. And it comes in as a color, which I can leave or change. But by default, it puts it after everything. This is not what we want, because we don't want to see the ugly back side of the letter on the back of our coaster. We want it to be hidden. So we're going to need to move that J into place right here. We want to put it right in there. And why do we want it in there? Remember, when we discussed how this coaster gets put together, we want it to stitch out that J after we have the top layer, but before we put on the back layer. Okay, so we have, let's just go to our stitch simulator again, and we have placement stitching, tacking down the top layer, then our J, then tacking down the bottom layer, the back behind it layer, and then our final satin stitching. In order to stitch this out, we've got to get it over to our embroidery machine, and it's really easy to do in Embrilliance Essentials. All we have to do once we modify our design is we do File, and we do Save As. Now there's a lot of saves in here, so it can be a little bit confusing. In this case, let's say I'm going to do a lot of these. Maybe I'm making them as Christmas presents or something like that. I would want to do Save As Stitch and Working. The stitch file is what's going to go over to my embroidery machine. The working file is this layout like I have right here that I can come back and edit later. So let's just save this on my desktop for now. I'm just going to call this, let's put it on my desktop so we don't get confused. We'll call this ITH Coaster J. Okay, now let's close it and let's open it again. So if I go to the desktop, do you see I have a .be file and a .pes file? The BE file is the working file. The PES file is what I'm going to send to my embroidery machine. So let's just open that .be file again. The beautiful thing about this is I can just really easily change my letter to something else. I might need to scooch it around a little bit just because of the nature of the letter, but it makes it really easy for me to save kind of like a template so that I can make a whole bunch of these coasters. But that .pes file is what I'm going to send over to the embroidery machine. So let's take a look at how my coaster stitched out. Okay, let's start stitching out our coaster. I've got my hoop water soluble stabilizer here, and just gonna clip on my hoop. I have a regular thread color. I have a red in here so you can actually see what's going on, and a white bobbin. Okay, that'll become important in just a minute. So let's load in the design. Okay, and start stitching our first color. Set. All right, and edit. Let's go. Okay. Oh, gotta lower my presser foot, and there we go. Okay, so this first round of stitching here is just our placement line, and we're going to use that as a guide to lay down our top fabric. So let's go ahead and put our top fabric down. Okay, so we want to make sure that when we lay our top fabric down, we are covering the placement line completely. Okay, perfect. Now let's start the next round of stitching. Perfect. Let's remove this from the hoop. And I'm going to trim all this excess fabric off using my applique scissors. Okay, so I have my trimmed circle here. Put the hoop back on, and I'm going to start my next round of stitching, which is the initial. Remember, I put this, sandwiched it right in between those colors. So let's go ahead and stitch this out. Put the presser foot down. Now we are done stitching out the letter. Looks great. And I am going to attach the back piece to the back. And what I usually do is I just tape it down with some painter's tape. So I'm going to go ahead and do that and then put it back on the machine. Okay, so we have taped the second piece to the back of the hoop. And now we're going to return it to the hoop and stitch out our next thread color. And sometimes, like if the tape gets hung up, you can run into a problem here. So we're just going to kind of feel, and it looks okay to me. So let's just start stitching. Put down the presser foot and let's go. We're done now stitching the back piece on, which looks great. So what I'm going to do next is just take the tape off and trim very close to the edge of the stitching. Okay, so I just wound a bobbin and it's red to match my red top stitching, so it'll look nice on the back. So I'm going to return this to the hoop, to the machine, and start stitching my last color. All right, we are done with the stitching, and here's the front and here's the back. Looks just as nice on the back as it does on the front. There's a couple little things we can trim off of here, but otherwise it looks great. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to cut this out of the stabilizer and then get it wet to make it go away. I can just cut it right out of the hoop. And get as close as I can to it, but sometimes a little bit of an extra stabilizer is good because when we get it wet, it will become kind of stiff. So let's get it wet and see what it looks like once it's dissolved. Okay, I've just gotten this all wet and I need to trim some of these little strings here, but this is my finished coaster. It has a nice clean finished edge and it's gonna have some stiffness to it once it dries. So we will wait for that to dry. I want it to dry flat, so I'm not gonna throw it in the dryer or anything, but I think it's gonna look great.